Hey math friends, so our learning target today is I can simplify and I can estimate square roots. So let's talk about this idea of what a square root is. Well, it is a square. We're going to think about the concept of what's true about a square. Well, what we know about the square is that the sides are the same. So for example, if this is a 3 by 3 square, the area of that square would be known as 9. So essentially what we're doing, we're taking something called a square root, is we're undoing the area. So which squares are perfect? Well, let's use that example. 9 is a perfect square, since 3 times 3 is 9. So since the sides are exactly the same, that's what we know it's special about a square, then 9 is what's known as a perfect square. So what are the perfect squares? So what are the perfect squares? So the things that have the same side lengths. Well, a 1 by 1 square has an area of 1. A 2 by 2, a 3 by 3, a 4 by 4, 5 by 5, 6 by 6, 7 by 7, 8 by 8, 9 by 9, 10 by 10, 11 by 11, 12 by 12, and so on. But those are the first 12, what we would call perfect squares. So that's a concept that we're going to be thinking about today, is I need you really to think about what's special about a square, that the side lengths are equal. So what is a square root then? We're basically undoing the area. So to fill in the blanks here, blank is the square root of blank, since blank equals blank times blank. So 3 is the square root of 9, since 9 is equal to 3 by 3. So what are we doing there? Well, we have this square that's 9. And when we take the square root, we use this symbol. This is the square root symbol. So if we take the square root of 9, we're asking what's the side length of that square, and the side length of that square is 3. So here's that same example here. If we have a square that has the area of 9, what's the side of that square? 3. Notice I'm just writing 3. I'm not writing 3 times 3. I'm not writing 3 to the second power. I'm just writing 3. So now, what about if we have a square that has the area of 64? What number times itself gives us an area of 64? So your answer should be 8, because 8 times 8 is 64, which we saw up here, one of the perfect squares. All right, just a reminder of what that symbol means. This symbol means square root, square root or square root, however you say it, however you would like to say it. So that symbol is basically saying, now if I know that the area of this square is 100, what does the side have to be? And you would come up with that the side has to be 10, because the square root of 100 is 10. So how does that work if we take the negative square root? Well, we learned recently that this symbol simply means take the opposite of your answer. So if we think about, we have this square that has the area of 25. What's the side of the square? We all know that 5 times 5 makes a square. So the square root of 25 is 5. However, now we're saying, well, let's make sure that we take the opposite of our answer. So the result of that would be negative 5. Okay. So why don't you try the next example? Go ahead and pause the video right now. Give that next one a shot. All right, so you should have given that a shot. So what is the square root of 81? Well, the square root of 81 is 9, because that's a 9 by 9 square. And of course, this symbol means take the opposite of your answer. So your answer should be negative 9. So hopefully you did okay on that one. Let's give this last one a shot. It's cool if you pause the video and give it a shot. The square root of 400 might be a little tricky for you because it's a pretty big square. However, when we work with zeros, sometimes things get a little bit easier. So what is the square root of 400? It's 20. What this symbol means is that we're going to take the opposite of that. So the square root of negative 400 should be negative 20. Okay, so that's what a square root is. So let's have you try a few of these on your own. I'm going to have you try the square root of 81. I know you've seen that one before. I'm going to have you try the square root of 4, but I'm going to make it negative or opposite. Okay, and I'm going to have you try the square root of 49. Give those 3 a shot. You should be pausing the video right now and giving those a shot. Okay, so let's give those a shot. Let's see how you did. This is a square. It has an area of 81. So what is the square root? Or what is the side length? Your answer should be 9. Why don't you go ahead and check that out? This is the square. It has an area of 4. What's the side length of that? It's 2. But this symbol says, hey, you have to take the opposite of that. So it would be the result of that would be negative 2. This is the square. Has an area of 49. So what's the square root of 49? Results should be 7. So hopefully you went 3 for 3 in that section on square roots. If you need to rewind or go back and see if you made any mistakes there, please do so. Okay. So what happens if we don't have what's called a perfect square? So we don't have a square, we have something called a rectangle. So we're going to talk about this square root of 32. I'm actually going to move all that off because I need more space than what they're providing me there. What's the square root of 32? Okay, so 32, is that a square or is that a rectangle? Well, let's think about the factors of 32. So 1 times 32, 2 times 16, 4 times 8, and there's probably more. So let me see if I'm missing any. I think I have them all. Those are the 6 things, the 6 numbers that go in, or the 3 factors of 32. None of those are squares, because in order to be a square, keep in mind here, the factors of 9 would be 1 times 9 or 3 times 3. And what's special about this 3 times 3 is it makes a square because the side lengths are the same. But I'm not seeing that happening here, which means the square root of 32 is not a square. It's a rectangle. So how do I estimate the answer when it's not perfect? It means my answer would never be perfect. So what we're going to do then is we're going to figure out what it's close to. So what are some squares that are close to 32 that are squares? Well, the square of 36 is close to 32. And I know if I take the square root of that, I get 6 because the square root of 36 is 6. What's another square that's close to 32? And if we go back to the first screen, we know that 36 is a perfect square, and we know that 25 is a perfect square. So I'm going to be dependent on those, or some of you just kind of have a quick feeling for what it is. So 25 is a perfect square. So if we take the square root of 25, we get 5. So my answer is somewhere between 5 and 6. And that's the skill of what we call, how do you estimate a square root? Estimating a square root. All right. So let's try that again down here with the square root of 17. So let's go take a look at our chart that we started with. The square root of 17. All right. Well, there's 16, and there's 9, and there's 25. None of those are the square root of 17 because we know that the square root of 17, you maybe remember this from elementary school, is prime, which means only 1 and 17 go into the square root of 17. It's prime. So it's not a square, it's a rectangle. And we know that the square root of 16 is perfect because it makes this square that has the side of 4. So the square root of 16 is 4, which means the square root of 17 is a little bit bigger than 4. The other square root that we know that lives in between here is the square root of 25. And the square root of 25 is 5. So our answer for the square root of 17 is somewhere between 4 and 5. And clearly, pretty close to 4, because the square root of 17 is pretty close to the square root of 16. All right, so I'm going to ask that you try these 3 examples, and then we'll go over them in a minute. While you're doing that, I'm going to list the perfect squares here on the right. I forgot the square root of 36, sorry. All right, so if you haven't paused the video, I'm going to have you do that now. All right, so square root of 35. Square root of 35 is between the square root of 36 and the square root of 25. You should have attempted these. You shouldn't be just counting on my answers, right? We all have to work for it. So the square root of 25 and the square root of 36. 35 is in between those two. Of course, it's super close to square root of 36. If we know that the square root of 25 makes a 5 by 5 square, and the square root of 36 makes a 6 by 6 square, so our answer for the square root of 35 is somewhere between 5 and 6. So go ahead and check to see, did you do okay in that? Could you see that it was a little bit closer to the square root of 36, so somewhere between the whole number 5 and the whole number 6, the integer? All right, let's try this next one. Let's see how you did. If you've not tried it yet, I'd like you to pause that video. Give it a shot. Make sure you're working for this, okay? Square root of 51 is between 49 and 64. So square root of 51 is between the square root of 49 and the square root of 64. So if we take a square, we take a look at the square here. The square root of 49 is 7. The square root of 64 is 8. So 51 is between 7 and 8. Now, if that's confusing, rewind it, try it again, give it a shot, because it's one of the perfect squares of 7 and 8. All right, last problem of the day. The square root of 72, not perfect, not a perfect square. We do not have any 2 whole numbers that will give us, when multiplied, 72. So it makes a rectangle. But there are things that are in between there. So we know that the square root of 81 is a perfect square, and it's bigger than the square root of 72. And we also know that the square root of 64 is smaller than the square root of 72 and makes a perfect square. So the square root of 64 is 8, and the square root of 81 is 9. So our answers are sitting somewhere between 8 and 9. So the square root of 72 was the initial question, which isn't perfect. So what we use is 2 perfect things, 2 perfect squares that we know of, 8 and 9, to figure out where it is, about where it is. And we know our answer is that it's somewhere between 8 and 9. So this skill today that we're talking about is called estimating square roots. So let's do a quick summary of what we know. So if we, whoops, I think I just deleted the wrong page. If we have a perfect square, like the square root of 9, no big deal, right? Square root of 9, we know that that is a 3 by 3 square, so the square root of 9 is 3. However, if we have the square root of 10, that's not a square. That's a rectangle. Its factors are 1 times 10 and 2 times 5. Those are rectangles, they're not squares. So what we would do then at this point is estimate where it is about. Well, we know it's between the square root of 9 and the next perfect square root, which is 16. Sorry, this is our summary for today. The square root of 9 is 3, and the square root of 16 is 4. So our answer is somewhere between 3 and 4. All right, math friends, that's it for today. So our lesson today is on square roots. Hopefully you feel comfortable. If not, watch it again. Have a glorious night. Good night. Great job today.